Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us second session of Perennia's Take Your Product to Market webinar series. The series is funded through the Agri-Food Accelerator Program. My name is Clarissa McIsaac, and I am a member of the Quality and Food Safety team here at Perennia. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Perennia is a provincial development agency with the mission to help farmers, fishers, and food processors be more prosperous and profitable. We are Nova Scotia's only technical development agency focused solely on our food sector and maximizing its value. Our quality and food safety team work primarily in the Maritimes with agri-food and seafood companies and offers solutions to quality and food safety challenges. In today's session, we are discussing what food safety factors to consider when preparing to take your product to market. Our presenter today is Elaine Grant, one of Perennia's quality and food safety specialists. Elaine has over 15 years of manufacturing experience working in various quality assurance and research and development roles in both the confectionery and dairy industries. For the past 8 years, Elaine has been with Perennia working with primary agriculture, bakeries, beverages, maple, egg, and other commodities. For those of you who have joined us today, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. This presentation will be followed by a short Q&A session, so if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box using the button located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And this webinar will be recorded and available for viewing and sharing on Perennia's YouTube channel. And if you missed last week's session with Emily Page and Gary Morton, where they discussed pricing your product for profit and understanding margins, it is also on Perennia's YouTube channel. Okay, Elaine, I'll let you get started.
Thanks, Clarissa. So this webinar is really geared towards small and medium primary producers and processors, sorry, it's a hard word to say today, who are making the leap to retail or are concerned about producing a safe quality product and not really sure how to start. So we're going to provide a basic overview today. A lot of our resources on our website do cover these topics in more detail, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. So today I'll give you a basic overview about food safety culture, what it is and how to achieve it at your farm or facility, finding and following food safety requirements in Nova Scotia, and we'll discuss some prerequisite programs and process controls you should have in place for safe production of your product. So the learning objectives for today, by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to recognize the need for food safety awareness when it comes to taking your product to market in Nova Scotia. You'll also be able to begin the process of implementing food safety aspects that we discussed today at your farm or facility. So maybe you've heard about food safety culture in the past. Perhaps a customer or vendor has discussed it. So we'll discuss what exactly is food safety culture. So our definition today is posted on the screen. It's really, food safety culture is an indicator of a successfully maintained and implemented food safety program at your operation, and it's a positive food safety culture. So it shows your commitment to your employees and your customers. So what does this mean to you and your operation? Does your company have a clear set of goals or like a mission statement or something? Some signs of successful food safety culture are effective leadership, employee involvement, communication, accountability, adaptability, customer focused. So often there's a poster on the wall and some buzzwords or inspirational quotes. So really, that doesn't describe what an overall company culture is. And sometimes it doesn't even reflect what's currently the state of the business. So it's not too late to begin to implement a culture of food safety, and you really need to measure your food safety culture. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So to evaluate your food safety culture, here's some questions you can ask yourself. So are all your employees supportive of the policies and procedures, and do they follow them? Are employees quick to bring any issues or potential food safety concerns to you or your supervisors? Is everyone proud to work at your facility? Do employees eat your products without any concerns? And do your employees promote your products and serve them to their friends, families, and pets? So we're going to do a poll. If I can get the screen to forward here. So how is your food safety culture? I'll give you a few minutes to fill that out. Okay, so I think we're ready to share this. Oh, shoot. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties there. So here's our poll out of 14 people that have responded. So 33% have a positive food safety culture. 50% say they have no problem implementing a positive food safety culture. And 17% said it's going to be challenging, but they're going to be willing to give it a try. All right, to spark a food safety culture, you need to have effective leadership to drive the food safety program. So your management and ownership really needs to take the initiative and be really transparent in the process and involve everyone in the process as well. So everyone has to follow the rules. That means management, visitors, contractors, everyone. Training has to be provided, and a good way to do this is through toolbox talks, even 5, 15, 20 minutes to talk about food safety every so often before people start work really keeps it in the forefront. Formal and informal training is totally fine. Not everything has to be behind a desk. Sometimes the best demonstrations are on equipment that you're bringing in or anything you've changed. So hands-on is always good. So changing your day-to-day behavior of an operation can't be done overnight. So it does take time. So take little bits and work on it at a time. Employees and management are more likely to be supportive of change if they can see a benefit to the operation as well. So if you can tell them the why, they'll better buy into a positive food safety culture. So we're going to talk about finding and following some rules in Nova Scotia right now. Usually the first inquiry we get is, I have this product, I'd like to go to retail, what do I need? Do I need a license? What kind of regulations need to follow? Do I need to have a food safety program? And it's usually because they're moving to retail, like stores, farm market, or even farm gate. So the answer is really dependent on what your product is and where you're selling it. There are various food safety requirements you need to consider. So it's not always like an easy, clear answer. So we do have to do quite a bit of digging to kind of get what your end use is. We're going to do another quick poll. Where do you currently sell your product? And you can select all that apply. There's farm gate, farm market, small local retailer, major local retailer, outside the province, and it may not even be applicable at this point if you're just starting out. All right, so here's your polling results out of 16 participants. We have 73% are selling at farm gate, 73% to farm market, 36 are selling to small local retailer. We don't have anybody selling to major local retailers yet. 9% are selling at a province, and 9% are not applicable. All right, so we're going to go through some Nova Scotia requirements here. I'm just going to flip my screen. There's some links here, and we're going to share these with everybody after the webinar. We'll give you a list of clickable links at the end of this. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, so we're taking a look here at the Nova Scotia food safety regulations. And if you scroll down this page, you will notice that there is a few definitions that will help you understand what the terms they're using. And there's also some exceptions that you really need to pay really close attention to when you're deciding if you fall under these regulations or not. Not everybody does, as you can see here. So the next link we want to look at is the Nova Scotia Food Retail and Food Services Code. You may have seen this before. It was posted with the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture, which now the Food Safety Division is under the Department of Environment. So in here, this is primarily for like farm market, retail, food stores and that kind of thing, and restaurants. But in here, they have a lot of references to prerequisite programs like premises. This is all premises stuff here. They have in here how to control food hazards, water, what to do with water and what's expected, preventing contamination, all about packaging, transport. Like these are all really good pieces of information you can reference when developing any kind of procedure or record. So they have some really good information in here. The next one link is for fact sheets through the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture website. A lot of the food safety stuff still hosted over here. So if you scroll down, they have a lot of fact sheets on potentially hazardous foods. They talk about foodborne illness. Down here, they have food safety at public markets. So they go into some fact sheets about Schedule A, B, and C products, which if you're trying to sell to farm market, that's referred to in those requirements that I'm going to click on in a second. So we'll take a look at these Schedule A products. So Schedule A product, this is a fact sheet on that. That's all of the inspected meat, poultry, seafood, your ready to eat foods, quiche, crepes, sandwiches, eggs in the shell, ready to eat salsa, sliced vegetables, and that kind of thing. And then your Schedule B products are, you do not need a permit for them. However, if they fall into, depends on their characteristics, their food characteristics, pH, that kind of thing, and the amount of sugar in them, you may have to get an approval letter. So read that closely if you produce those products. Schedule C's are not permitted to be sold. So there's your list there: unpasteurized milk, inspected meats, seafood, meat or poultry defined under the Wildlife Act, that kind of thing. So those are all not permitted. So before you go to market, you should read those 3 fact sheets. And there's another fact sheet here about selling foods at public markets. And it gives you all the guidance there and gives you some links as well. So the next one we want to go into, and this is one I have to send to a fair amount of people because it seems to be a lot of inquiries about how to get into farm market. What do I need to do? So there's guidelines here for public markets. There's guidelines if you're going to add ice cream scooping onto your farm or little operation. There's requirements there. So it's good to find where this information is so you can make sure you follow all the rules. So I'll give you an example of an inquiry we had about Nova Scotia requirements and what to do. Maybe you fall into this category. We had somebody ask if they could sell meat from their freezer that was processed and packed at a provincially inspected facility. So the answer to that, there's a few different ways it could go. We needed a bit more information. So we went through the Provincial Meat Inspection Act and regulations, which there's a link to that on this food safety regulation. There's a reference here to the Meat Inspection Act, and you can follow that information there. And the answer was really no license or inspection was required if it was their animal, they weren't selling it to a reseller or using it for commercial purposes, but everybody in the province of Nova Scotia needs to have some form of traceability with the new Safe Food for Canadians Act, which we're going to get into in a minute. So you have to be able to keep track of what and when it was sold, and you need to have product that's lot coded. Now, if this person was going to go on to be further processing this meat from the provincially inspected facility, like making that product into bacon, sausages, or other products, they would need a meat slaughtering and processing license issued by food safety section of the Nova Scotia Environment. So it really depends on what you're doing with the product. If they're selling at public market, they need a public market vendor permit because this product is a Schedule A product with it being meat. So it's just some things to think about when you're kind of asking the questions. It really depends on what you're doing with it, what the product is, and where your end use is. All right, so we'll go back. So next we're going to talk about the Safe Food for Canadians requirements. Now, if you're selling intra-provincially, which means within the province of Nova Scotia, that you will probably only need traceability, but you really need to go through the timelines for your product. And we're going to go through that in a minute. We do have, if you're selling intra-provincially, it really depends on several different factors. It depends on what you're doing with the product. It depends on where it's going. It depends on how much revenue your firm brings in or your facility brings in. There's a lot of different factors, so I'll take you through some of the timelines here in a minute. But our Safer Market booklet from 2019-2020 and the new edition that should be out next month, it provides a really good overview on how to get a license, like step-by-step processes with links. So if you want to get your hands on that, just let Clarissa know. It's going to be electronic copy. It's going to be posted to our website soon, but we should have printed copies in by mid to end of March. We can hand those out if you're interested. And Clarissa's information is going to be at the end of the webinar. So we're going to switch screens here, and I'll show you a little bit about the timelines, the traceability, and this neat little gap assessment that CFIA has put on their website. Okay, so we're going to go into the timelines here. So, and like I said, you're going to get all these links at the end of this webinar. So here in the timetable, they have several different commodities here. There's dairy products and eggs, processed fruit and vegetable products, fish, meat, fresh fruit and vegetables, honey and maple products, unprocessed food, food additives, and all the other foods. So we're going to go into fresh fruit and vegetables. I don't know where you guys are all from on here, but we'll go through this one first. All right, so when you click on that link, it'll give you the timetable for fresh fruit and vegetables, and it'll come up like this. And this is probably the clearest tool they have on their website to determine what you need to do. So if you're going to sell interprovincially, that means across borders. If you're just growing and harvesting it, you don't need a license, but you might need a PCP, which is basically a preventative control plan. That's your HACCP plan, okay? Preventative controls are those prerequisite programs we're going to talk about in a moment. You would need those in place, and you would need traceability. So we're going to scroll down a little bit and get into more of the intra-provincial group. So if you're anybody in Canada, if you're selling fresh fruits and vegetables to consumers at retail and that's your sole activity, you don't need a license, you don't need a PCP, and you don't need process controls, but you definitely need traceability. And we're going to get into what lot coding and traceability is in a minute. But here for interprovincial trade, if all you're doing is manufacturing, processing, trading, preserving, you're not required. There's no provincial regulations that require you to have a federal license. So you're not required to do anything, but the whole thing is you have to, it's the whole selling part of it. So if you are selling at retail, and retail includes farm gate, farm market, Sobeys, Loblaws, Avery's, you name it, you have to have some traceability. And we did just get that confirmed from CFIA the other day. All right, so the next link we want to look at is traceability. So there's a definition down here of what requirements and what documents you should have, what a lot code is, which we're going to get into in a moment. There's all these little, everything with an underline you can click on this website. And it tells you exactly what you need to put on your product. And we'll get into that when we talk about traceability in a moment. There's a fact sheet on traceability that talks about what you need to do to meet requirements. And I'll click on this English one here. And it talks about what the requirements are. There's an interactive tool, what documents you need, explains traceability, trace the food, one step back, one step forward. That's all in here. So the next link, what happened there now? Oh no, I lost my share. Technology works great when you know what you're doing here. I don't know what happened there. Anyways, that's the traceability fact sheet. The next tool we talked about was the gap assessment. So if you find out when you go through your timelines that you need preventative control plans or preventative controls, you can use this gap assessment, and really you could use it anyways because it's got some really good tips on what's expected by CFIA. And go through your facility and your programs and see what you need to do to make to meet requirements. It talks about conveyances and equipment, land and location, and it really gives you some good guidance on that. Separation of food, lighting is sufficient, that kind of thing. So definitely use that tool as well. And that one's really hard to find on their website, so we will provide the link for that. All right, so we will move on to the next. All right, so prerequisite programs. So I'm not sure how many of you guys have prerequisite programs, but they're now termed process controls under CFIA. If you're running a Canada GAP program, all those, which is for fresh fruit and vegetables, all those components of that manual are process controls. So you're in pretty good shape if you're following that manual. So our first edition of the Safer Market booklet really goes into detail on how to implement and document. It gives some really good example of how to do some checklists and that kind of thing. So if you want to get your hands on that, like I mentioned it, contact Clarissa. The other thing we have is the e-learning series, which really goes into detail on how to document and implement your prerequisite programs. So we'll do a high-level overview of these right now. So prerequisite programs, maybe you're familiar with this or not, I'm not sure, but it's just basically the programs to control hazards in these areas. So premises, transportation and storage, equipment, that includes calibration, personnel, sanitation, pest control, recall and traceability, allergens, and food additives. So your basic prerequisite program should have policies and/or procedures and records that document your good manufacturing practices, or in the case of fresh produce farms, your good agriculture practices. So really you need that good documentation to prove that you're doing what you say you're doing and provide some consistency and some accountability, as well as that traceability piece that's really important this year. Okay, so with documentation, about 20 or so years ago, it was all about filling these massive binders with information, and they sat on the shelf until the auditor showed up. That's not how it goes anymore. A lot of people we work with on a daily basis are coming to us to take these massive programs and make them into a usable, living document. And really, we want to keep it short, relevant, and realistic. So it's not a wish list. It's not what you intend to do. It's what you are doing to meet any kind of requirements you need to meet. And really, it doesn't matter where you start, just start somewhere. You may already have some records in place. I mean, a lot of people are doing invoicing or they have receipts. Those are all really good starts to records, and they can be slightly modified to put all the information in that you need. Your record retention is minimum of 2 years, or for the shelf life of your product plus 1 year. So if your shelf life of your product would say 6 months, it would be 1 year and 6 months. You should keep your records and really involve your employees and everyone into the development of the program. They're going to be the ones that are filling out these records and reading these procedures. So they need to be able to understand and be able to follow and want to fill out this paperwork. All right, so with document control, so when you're writing a document, you need to have, it's amazing how many we see that don't have anything on them, not even a title, they just have steps. So you really need to have a title. You need to have your company name on it, because if you wrote it, you might as well take credit for it. Your revision date, supersedes date, which just means the date previous of the version that it was before. The author name, your page number, and it should be like page 1 of 2 or something like that, instead of just page 1, 2, 3, because you don't know how many pages are in that packet. And for procedures, you really need at minimum to write the responsibility down, who's responsible for it, what the frequency of monitoring is. Any simple task steps, like bullet points are great, tables are great. Anything visual you can put in, like some people put pictures of equipment in for sanitation, of like taking apart pieces of equipment, that works really well. And any directions on what to do if an issue arises as well should be on there. All right, so for premises, it includes exterior, interior, your personal facilities such as washrooms, lunchrooms, change rooms, and water. So with external environment, that involves buildings and fields, you need to watch for excessive dust on roads, any damage or holes in the exterior that could allow pests to come in. You don't want to see any high grasses, shrubs, or old equipment debris close up to the building. I know everybody has that nice little equipment graveyard in the back, but keep it organized and keep it off the ground if at all possible, like up on pallets or like a shelf of some sort or whatever outside, just so pests can't get in there and hide. You don't want pooling of water, and you want all the doors to be self-closing and kept closed, and no gaps around the doors either. So if doors have to be left open for ventilation, you need to screen them, or you need to improve the ventilation in your facility. So internal, it talks about, they're referencing their building design, condition, your floors, walls, and ceilings are all smooth, cleanable surfaces. You want to make sure your employee and product flow is such that it doesn't involve some cross-contamination. You want to make sure you have proper ventilation so you don't have buildups of condensation or dust. You want to have adequate lighting. So your lighting should be about 110 lux for staging areas, and for basic production area should be about 220 lux. And your inspection type areas or anywhere where you really need to see what you're doing should be about 550. So with hand washing stations, they should be located right inside the production door, so nobody or on the other side of it, but no door to press into it. You don't want to wash your hands then go touch a door and go in, because that defeats the purpose. So make sure they're fully stocked, well located, so they're convenient, with a minimum of soap, potable water that's at a comfortable temperature, hand washing instructions, hand drying equipment, paper towel is preferred if it's hands-free, and a garbage can. Your washrooms and lunchrooms should not open directly into production and pack areas, because that could be a source of contamination. And you should have an area where employees can store their personal items and change their clothes if they need to. Racking is a good idea to provide so people can hang up any working effects before they leave the production area, so it doesn't get mixed up with their home clothes. Accredited labs. So a lot of the local hospitals in Nova Scotia are accredited. Harlow at the Dal AC there is accredited as well. You can take your water there. They should be tested semi-annually from municipal sources, and you should get the annual printout from your municipality about the water quality and the testing they do. It's usually available online. You just go on, skip on the internet and get it. And wells should be tested monthly, and they have to meet Health Canada requirements. Now, if you can't afford to do it monthly, or you have case history where you've never had an issue, you can decrease that as long as you have the proof. But they do recommend monthly. For primary producers, you really have to keep an eye on the high levels of wildlife and bird activity out in the field and any areas prone to flooding. Manure can't be applied any later than 120 days before harvest, and that's key. Washrooms should be close to the field site, but not directly in the field or bordering on the field. And you should have hand washing stations provided with a minimum of those baby wipes or hand wipes, but not Clorox or Lysol wipes, those don't count. Sanitizer, a garbage can, and some directions on how to, so people know how to wash their hands. They shouldn't leave any personal effects in the field, and lunches should be eaten away from the field and hands washed prior to returning to harvest or pack, because that's a source of contamination with allergens, potentially. So with transportation and storage, really the quality starts with your inputs. So if you have garbage in, you're going to have garbage out. So make sure you're getting good quality components from any suppliers and that you can trust those suppliers. The receiving and shipping have similar type of requirements, like you load and offload from clean vehicles, make sure everything's at appropriate temperature if that's applicable to your product. Make sure you're getting good dates in from your suppliers so that you can use them up before the expiry. Any intact and boxes and bags of your packaging and product should be intact. And something we do see quite a bit is the ground level dock doors, which aren't ideal for offloading and onloading product, because most of the time product isn't really protected. The doors are left open a little bit too long, so flies and insects and rodents can get in. So really a nice secure like seal around the door is more ideal, but if not, you're going to have to mitigate that risk by just making sure you're really quick offloading and onloading, get that door shut. Storages, your product and packaging should be stored off the floor and away from the walls. They say about a foot, but as long as you can see around and inspect, you're fine. And most food safety standards will vary between 18 inches to a foot anyways, or 6 inches even. Make sure that your storages are proper temperature and that you have really good stock rotation. And that's not just important for freshness of product. It's really important if you get components in from a manufacturer and they have an issue, and if you use that stock out of sync or out of like used March product before April product and you're all over the place, if they have a recall, your recall has just gone from maybe a short week of production to like several months. So stock rotation is really key. All right, so for equipment, my mouse is giving me some trouble today for some reason. It must need a new battery. For equipment, much like the premises, walls, ceilings, and floors, you want a smooth, cleanable, non-corrosive, non-absorbent surface. So you really need to make sure that you don't have wood in places that's not protected, or preferably no wood at all. Depending on what you're doing, if you're in a really wet zone, you really shouldn't have wood. You don't want any cracks, open ends, or crevices in your equipment. We frequently see rust, and that needs to be removed, or a better metal needs to be used, or it needs to be protected better. You want your equipment to be easily cleanable, so not up against a wall where you can't get in behind it. And you want to make sure your preventative maintenance program is in good condition. So if you're actually experiencing frequent breakdowns, you probably need to step up the preventative maintenance frequency on your equipment, because really you shouldn't be having that many breakdowns. You should be catching them at your preventative maintenance program monitoring. So I guess we're getting some people raising their hands. If you have questions, you should just submit it to the Q&A. If you're having difficulty hearing us, send us a message as well on the question and answer, and we'll deal with that as it comes up. So with personnel, training is really key. We see that that's something that doesn't get the attention it needs to all the time. And like I said before, you could do a toolbox talks, you could do in-person training, you can do demonstrations with equipment, that kind of thing. It doesn't all need to be formal classroom training. And really the best program to start with implementation of a food safety program is the personnel and hygiene and good manufacturing or good agricultural practices. It's probably the easiest one to write. So you want to include hand washing in that SOP or policy. You want to include personal hygiene requirements, which we're going to go into in a minute. Employee illness and injury, what to do if that happens. And you want to document your good manufacturing and agricultural practices that you wish to implement at your facility. So with personal hygiene policy, you should have the following in place as listed. You don't want any jewelry worn. The exception there is your medical alert jewelry. Now you should work with your employees to make sure it's not going to contaminate your product or pose a risk for them. I'm thinking like moving parts and equipment. So work with your employees. It's important they stay safe and people know that they have a medical issue that everybody needs to know about. You shouldn't have any you should have clean short fingernails, no polish, no fake fingernails, no fake eyelashes even. If you can see jewelry, I should add that, if you can see jewelry that shouldn't be worn, so no permanent piercings and that kind of thing. Should be no smoking, chewing gum, eating or drinking, with the exception of water. Now, when water needs to be consumed just for safety reasons, it should be consumed away from product and packaging, so you'll have to control that. People need to report to work with clean clothes, appropriate footwear, hair and beard nets, or at least a hair covering or to tie back their hair. No personal items in the production and pack areas, and that includes field areas. And you don't want anybody walking around with stuff in their upper pockets like pens and paper clips and that kind of thing, because that can fall into open product. All right, so hand washing. So you should have hand washing signs posted where your hand washing sinks are. And it's really good to have something that's more of a pictogram, like with pictures, because it goes across every language and it's universal. And make sure those directions reflect what you have stocked. So if you want them to use sanitizer, make sure it refers to sanitizer. If you're not using sanitizer, make sure it doesn't say anything about sanitizer on that pictogram. So to properly wash your hands, you need to wet your hands, wash with single-use soap, so avoid any bar soaps, and scrub for 20 seconds. So they say sing happy birthday or the alphabet song. Rinse your hands dry and sanitize if you have sanitizer available. And then employees need to know, and anybody in the facility or on the farm needs to know, that they have to wash their hands at the start of the shift, after breaks, so it's eating, drinking, smoking, everything. Every time they enter the field or production pack area from another area, handling any non-food contact surfaces, pallets, garbage, cleaning tools, that kind of thing. And after touching their face or adjusting any hair or beard nets. So when it comes to hair and beard nets, make sure they're big enough to contain the hair. We see a lot of too small hair nets, and they don't on people's heads either, and people are constantly touching them. So you need to make sure that they're in a good size. It's good to have a couple sizes available. With good manufacturing practices and good agricultural practices, the following are items you should have at minimum in your policy. Doors need to be kept closed at all times. A lot of people prop them open and the like just for ventilation or even easy access to get in and out. That should be avoided because that's a good place for pests and insects to get in. Food contact and non-food contact items should be kept separate. So a food contact item is anything in direct contact with food, packaging, food contact equipment and utensils. Non-food contact items are things like floors, equipment legs, buckets, brooms, walls, and pallets, that kind of thing. So they really should not meet. And we do see on occasion that people will clean equipment and set it on slip sheets directly on the floor, and that's not enough to protect food contact equipment. It really needs to be kept off the floor. So if you're going to do a pallet and put a slip sheet, then that would be fine. Hand washing sinks should not be used for equipment washing, and they definitely shouldn't be used for either sink shouldn't be used for emptying or filling mop buckets. So make sure your mop bucket area is kept separate from your equipment washing and hand washing sinks. And you shouldn't be washing equipment in hand washing sinks, and you shouldn't wash your hands in equipment sinks either. Waste has to be kept empty, like frequently, and containers have to be kept clean. That's usually something that should be added to your sanitation records to make sure they don't get missed. Spills should be cleaned up regularly. And product packaging should only be used for product. We do see boxes, bags, that kind of thing get reused to hold equipment or hold chemicals or whatever. And it's not really good practice. I mean, you can scratch it out and mark on it what the use is for, but really it doesn't send a good message. So you should avoid to do that at all costs. And remember that visitors, contractors, and management all need to follow these processing practices you have in place. So with sanitation, it's important to do pre-season and post-season cleaning for storages, buildings, and equipment. Make sure that you have sanitation in place for food contact and non-food contact surfaces. And your cleaning frequency can be really anything you decide it to be, as long as you can keep the area sanitary. So you might have some daily cleaning, you might have weekly, you might have monthly, and you may have some things that only need to be cleaned annually. So really make sure that you're cleaning enough and document that. Some cleaning steps that you should have in place for your sanitation SOPs at least. And now this is for wet cleaning. Not every business is going to do wet cleaning. So with the wet cleaning, you'd want to manually remove the debris, pre-rinse with water to remove any debris, wash with like a really good detergent and make sure that's food safe, by the way. Post-rinse with water and inspect to make sure everything's removed, because if you sanitize when there's still debris there, it's not going to work. And then make sure you inspect at the end to make sure the cleaning is effective. Now, if you're in a bakery or a chocolate type setting, you don't want to add water, because you can what it does is encourages pathogens to grow in a wet environment. So what you might do instead is to manually remove the debris, and you're going to dry scrape and vacuum. And then you probably sanitize maybe about once a week, depending on how often you are cleaning or how often you're running. With pest control, it's important to prevent the 3 things pests want to live in your facility or on your farm. So food, water, and harborage points, which by harborage points means places for them to hide and nest. Make sure that if you keep those 3 items in control, you shouldn't have a pest control problem. You can do your own pest control in-house, and a number of people do locally, or you can contract it out. It's up to you. If you do it in-house, you really need to maintain your records at least monthly. And if you do have a pest issue, make sure you're checking at least twice a month or more frequently. And domestic animals are included as pets, so please don't bring them into the production type environments. All right, so some pest prevention tips for you are to keep materials off the ground and away from the walls, secure and remove your garbage, keep vegetation trimmed back. It's a really good idea to, if you can, to gravel a perimeter around your property, around the buildings. About a foot is usually really good enough, because rodents don't like to run across stone out in an open area, and it actually prevents any kind of grass and shrubs to grow up close to your building too, so it kind of serves 2 purposes. If you're going to set up traps, please keep the bait stations to the outside and don't bait inside, because that could be a chemical or an allergen risk. And if you're going to use fly lights, make sure they're not the bug zapper type, because when the insects get zapped, the insect pieces go everywhere, and that could get into your product. So we're going to talk a little bit about recall and traceability. Traceability, as I mentioned, is a requirement for people selling their product at retail. So things you have to think about when you're creating your recall plan, which is just a step-by-step instructions in case of emergency. Would you be able to remove your product? How quickly can you do it? Could you even find it? And if a supplier contacted you to tell you that they sold you something that wasn't quite right, would you be able to find where you used it and remove your product from the marketplace? That's where that first in, first out stock rotation thing comes into play. It can really mess you up in a recall situation. So maintaining traceability really starts with those primary ingredients and product and packaging. So when you're writing your recall program, make sure you refer to every single piece of documentation, like your invoices and your receipts. Any internal tracking you might do on the computer, make sure those are all filled in step by step, so you don't lose track of during a recall high stress situation of where you can find your product. So as I mentioned, the traceability is a requirement for anybody selling to retail, but your definition of a lot code is pretty broad through CFIA. So here's the official definition from the CFIA website. So examples of a lot code do include a production date or a harvest date, your best before date, if you decide to use one of those, your establishment number, license number from Safe Food for Canadians, and fresh fruits and vegetables, you could have a harvest date, grower identification number, or even GPS coordinates would classify as a lot code. So we did just get confirmation for the fresh fruit and vegetable people that For example, if strawberries are packaged by the grower and harvester in consumer packages and sold at market directly to customers, they do require the traceability labeling. So if the fruit and vegetable is not visible, you need the common name on there, you need the name and principal place of business, and you need a lot code if it's market ready packaging, consumer prepackaged food. So some examples of a code you could use are, the first one is a best before type situation. Very common for Loblaws, likes to see this kind of coding. The next one is year, week, day, shift. You can go with the Julian date, which a number of the bakery and confection people tend to use, or you can go with the actual harvest date. So with fresh produce, you don't normally need the year because they don't hang around. So, because they'll spoil. So you can just go June 14th, field 1. So then you know at least it's the product in the field 1 that you can find. So if you're not, to say another thing about the lot coding and traceability, if you're selling intra-provincially and you're selling to a retail store, your traceability requirements do not apply as the responsibility of the retailer. So that would be people like Sobeys, Loblaws, that kind of thing. But it is recommended that you do some traceability and know where to find your product. All right, so don't forget to track the following items. So a lot of people forget about their personal use of their own product. They don't track where that goes. They don't track waste. Lab and inspector samples, you can track them on those CFIA reports they give you. Don't forget rework, reclaim, employee sales. Those are all really important things to track. You can track them through electronic means. You can use paper, a logbook, a calendar, whatever you want to do. They do allow that flexibility. So the next thing we briefly want to talk about is allergens. So even if you do not have allergens in your product or at your facility, if you have employees, they can bring all these allergens into your farm or field or facility. So be familiar with these are the Canada's top allergens. So wheat, eggs, milk, mustard, peanuts, sesame, soy, tree nuts, shellfish, fish, and crustaceans, and sulfates if they're greater than 10 parts per million. So you still have to worry about allergens if you don't produce allergens because they can come in through your employee lunches. So that's where your hygiene policy comes in place. It really does control that. And we're going to go in, then we're going to go into a quick little cool tool that I found for CFIA allergen labeling assistance. So we'll just get into that. All right, so this is a really neat food allergen labeling tool I found. And it goes through and kind of demystifies what you need to do to put on your packaged food if there's allergens in it. It gives you some great examples here of some potential ways to label your products. It talks about all the common allergens at the bottom here. It explains where you can find them. And there's other food allergen labeling links and that kind of thing on here as well. So that's a really useful tool. And there's a nice little PDF fact sheet on there as well. Okay, so many of you may not have food additives, but I figured I should discuss them anyways because they kind of lump them in with allergens. So those food additives are called, they're anything that's like processing aids or added nutrients, like your vitamin Ds, your minerals, your amino acids that could be added to your product. So all of these processing aids and nutrients have to be approved by Health Canada or part of that Part D of the Food and Drug Regulations, that's approvals. So make sure that you're complying if you're adding items to your food. So processing aids are actually, here's a good example one. You can use rice husks in a juice press if you're making a juice that doesn't want to, if it gets gummed up in your press. So that would be called a processing aid. So you really have to keep track of that. So if you have any questions kind of moving forward, We do have this Nova Scotia Agri-Food Accelerator Program, and this webinar is through one of our initiatives with education. We also have a food safety obstacles part where we can come on site, or you can come here and we can go through your program or give you a pre-audit assessment. But don't be afraid to call or email anytime. It can be confusing going through the regulations and knowing what you need to do, and we don't mind assisting with that. All right, so we have some resources on our website, and we have some courses coming up. There's a HACCP 1 and 2 coming up in March, I believe, or April. We have Canada Gap training mid-March. It's also available on our website. Just go under Quality and Food Safety Training. We have the Safe Food for Canadians requirements. If you think you need preventative controls written or process controls written, you need to come to this training. It's really well done, and you'll walk out and be able to start documenting what you need to be compliant to CFIA. We have e-learning food safety fundamentals online as well. There's 7 courses that go into a bit more detail about HACCP plans and prerequisite programs. We do have our food safety resources section on our website under Quality and Food Safety. And as I mentioned, we have those Safe for Market booklets, and that's Clarissa's email there. We are going to have, there's electronic copies on there of last year's, and there will be for this year as well. But if you prefer a hard copy, just send her an email and she'll send it along to you. So thanks for coming in today and listening to this webinar. And if you have questions, I guess a few have popped up right now, we can go through. But if you have any further questions, just let us know.
Okay, thank you very much, Elaine. So we will open up for questions now. We have a couple here. So the first one is, if someone is selling vegetables at a farmer's market, gross income is $50,000, for example, then they would need traceability?
Yes, you're going to need traceability. You won't need a PCP and you won't need process controls, but you definitely need the traceability.
Okay, and the second question is, how hard is it to achieve other safety programs such as BRC when already following the Safe Food for Canadian regulations?
With Canada Gap in particular, that's a global food safety program. You are 99.5% compliant to Safe Food for Canadian regulations. So that's great in itself. The only component you're missing there is your grading, weighing, consumer protection type information. So with BRC and SQF, they're a bit more robust. So it's not hard, but you definitely have to add quite a bit to it because it goes into food fraud and that kind of thing. So in food defense. So that's a little bit different than what CFIA is requiring.
Okay, just while we're waiting for anybody else to get their questions in, we did put a few together about some inquiries that we often get. So I guess I'll start with,
what is the first step you should take to get your product to market? So the first step you should take is go through those links with regards to selling in Nova Scotia or selling out of the province. You really need to talk, if you're going to a retailer, you need to ask them what they want. Sobeys requirements are vastly different than Loblaws and Costco. And, you know, the same with Avery's or even the market out in Masstown. They all require different regulations or specifics that you need to work with your retailer on that to determine what you need to follow.
okay, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So thank you everyone for attending and submitting your questions. If you didn't get your question in or you think of one later on, you can email them to Elaine. Her information is up on the screen there now, and you can use the subject line Food Safety Success, and she will get back to you as soon as possible. We hope to see you again in future sessions of the Take Your Product to Market webinar series. The next session is on February 27th at 12 p.m. where we will hear from Gary Ganniers from Legal Suites about Canadian food labeling requirements, and registration for that is open on our website now. Okay, so I think that's all we have for today. Again, thank you for joining, and we hope you have a great day.